Welcome to Unit 2, Lecture 4, Section 6.1. In this, we're going to talk about habitats, niches, and species interactions. Learning objectives. Explain how competition shapes communities. Identify factors that determine and describe habitats and niches. Explain how keystone species shape communities. And identify 3 primary ways organisms depend on each other. A habitat is an area with a particular combination of physical and biological environmental factors that affect which organisms can live within it. It's another way for describing ecosystem. It's another way for describing a biome. It's just that now we're throwing into the fact that there is an organism, like this eel, that can live and thrive there. A microhabitat is a tiny part of a much larger habitat, hence the word micro. So we can have microhabitats where we end up with a lot of times bugs. Bugs live in microclimate or microhabitats because they're a lot smaller and things that can affect them a little bit differently. A lot of times microhabitats have their own set of environmental conditions called a microclimate. Okay, so if you can think about, so here it gives you a picture. Okay, you've got a bug living on a bird. Okay, you've got some caterpillar living up in the branches over here. Okay, so those are all technically microhabitats, just because, and like I said, a lot of times it revolves around bugs. Now, a microbiome is the actual microbial community, and you actually have a microbiome in your own body. We have a lot of bacteria that live inside of us that are healthy for us, that are good for us, that help us, and not the bad kind that always make us sick. So that's one of the reasons why when you do go on an antibiotic, you should always have yogurt or a probiotic or something of that to kind of keep your microbiome in check, because there's a lot of things that our microbiome does for us that's really helpful. There's a lot of good bacteria. Species have what's called a tolerance. So the tolerance is what they can I don't know what's happening here. Okay, there we go. Sounds like it wasn't clicking. Tolerance is the range of external conditions with which a species can survive and reproduce. And all of them have a optimal range. Right? That means this is their happiest, this is the best, they survive the best here, they reproduce the best here. Once we get outside that optimum range, we end up with what are called zones of stress. And this just means that they're surviving, they're probably reproducing, but maybe not so much, maybe not as often. Sometimes, depending on the organism, like especially larger mammals, if they can't find the food to take care of their young and to support their young, they won't necessarily end up having more young. Okay, and then if we get to the absolute limit, okay, we get to their limit of tolerance. And that means past this line right here, they won't even survive. Okay, usually between the zones of stress and the upper or lower limit of tolerance, there's usually no reproduction happening. It's basically just they're surviving just enough to survive. And organisms can live there, but usually it's for a short period of time. Once they reach, let's just say temperature, okay, plants will grow in a certain temperature really well, okay? Once we get too hot or too cold, we'll enter that zone of stress. They could live, okay? It's not the best, but they can do it, all right? And then once we get much hotter or colder from there, then they're done, okay? And they can't survive anymore. So you can see at the upper ends and the lower ends, there's not even any survival. Organisms that are in that kind of environment will just not survive. The niche is all of the range of physical and biological conditions in which it can survive and reproduce, as well as obtaining the resources that it needs. Now, this is a very, very narrow description, incredibly narrow. Oops, I want the pen. Give me the pen. Thank you. Okay. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's why it's drawing a different color. I was like, I can't see it. Okay, so this is a very narrow description of its tolerance, basically. Okay. And what happened, ooh, that was, I'm writing like a 3-year-old. Okay. And so what the niche is the absolute narrowest tolerance that a species can have. And generally we can only have one species occupying one niche at any given times. Now, the niche can all be in the same place. So you can see here we have a picture of a tree, and we have the one bird living on the top or outer edge. We have this bird living in the middle, kind of in a T shape there. All right, and then we have this bird living down here at the bottom. They are all warblers, okay? But they have different areas that they occupy in that spruce tree. So this is how narrow a niche can be, okay? And this is how defined it can be. So you can see we have no overlap here really between these 3 different birds, but they all are occupying the same type of tree. So what I was saying is that we can't have 2 species occupying the same niche at the same time in exactly the same habitat, so the same place. So here's an example of it. We have Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum, which are 2 microorganisms. So if we put them together, okay, you can see here they both tank. All right, they both don't do such a hot job. All right, the dashed lines are when they're alone. They can both live a lot, or they can live and they can reproduce a lot more, okay, and almost equally if they're by themselves. But when we put them together, they can't survive, and you can see here even caudatum actually dies out when it's trying to survive with aurelia. And so what happens is we have this competitive exclusion principle. Just like 2 teams fighting for the same trophy, no 2 teams can have the same trophy. It's just not possible if you're going for a state championship or a regional or whatever. Okay? No 2, somebody's got to lose. So the competitive exclusion principle is basically somebody's got to lose when they're fighting it out together. A keystone species is something that's a little bit different though. Okay? A keystone species is a species that actually plays a vital and unique role. So if you look at this, it's actually kind of like Pennsylvania has that shape, because Pennsylvania is called the Keystone State. Why is it called the Keystone State? A lot of history. Go talk to your history teachers about that. But what we have here is this keystone. If we were to take this otter, okay, in this picture, if we were to remove this otter, what would happen to this arch? It would crumble, okay? It would fall apart. But what's happening is the otter is actually holding this whole arch together. So what's happening is this otter not being part of that population is actually the glue to make this arch work. And that's what a keystone species is. A keystone species is really important for maintaining structure, stability, and diversity in that ecosystem. They're kind of like the biological enforcers, if you would. Not on purpose, obviously, and they're not necessarily all going to eat everything, because they don't. But what they do is them being there helps control all of the other biotic factors in the ecosystem, either directly or indirectly. And last but not least, symbioses. We're going to talk a little bit more about these in class, because they're kind of complicated to just read on a slide, but this way we just get the definitions out there. So commensalism is a relationship in which one of the organisms benefits, all right, the other is neutral. It's neither helped nor harmed. Doesn't really matter. The other species generally doesn't even know that it's there, doesn't care that it's there, okay? A mutualism is where we have two species that both benefit. It's a plus-plus relationship, okay? Both species get something out of it. And then last but not least, a parasitism, which is where one species benefits and the other one is hurt, okay? Ticks, in the one lecture talking about density-dependent interactions, limiting factors. Ticks are a parasite, okay? They feed off of the blood of another species. Not so comfortable, right? Okay, so that's what a parasite is. Like I said, we're going to talk more about these in class, but I just wanted to get those definitions out there for you. All right, have a great day. Bye.